Hello, this is Franklin Runge, the Faculty Services Librarian for the University of Kentucky College of Law. Today's sort of podcast, which is for my Introduction to Legal Research students, is a sort of a recap of everything that we learned last semester. So we're going to just, as I said to you all last semester, when you come back in January, we're going to hit the ground running. We have a lot of work to do to get you ready for the appellate brief problem that you'll be working on. And as this class just happens to be, it's pretty front-loaded. So we're going to be doing a lot of work in January of just sort of getting prepared to write that appellate brief. One of the things I want to do a few quick sort of housekeeping matters, and then I'll kind of talk about the reading that you had, and then I'm going to take you through some web searches that will be sort of helpful, I think, Westlaw and Lexis searches that I think will be helpful. So one of the things I want to start by saying is how thankful I am to have you all as students. I was thinking about it, what is a school if you don't have any students? Or what is a school if you have just terrible students? It's not, you all make this place. You all make this place important. You make it special to me. You all make it a lot better. So I want to just say I'm very thankful that you all are here, and I'm very thankful to see you all for the second semester. As I go along in my life, some of the more interesting and sort of fun connections that I've made since I've moved to Lexington are with our alumni, who are wonderful, good people. So that's something exciting, and something exciting for us all to be looking forward to. I want to talk for a moment about the schedule of this semester. So in week one, we're going to do sort of a recap of everything that we learned last semester with a little bit of a focus on what your problem is going to be like, your upcoming problem on, on the protective sweep and some constitutional law issues, which we'll talk about that shortly. So week one is a sort of review. By week two, I kind of want you to already have a working copy of two parts of your research plan and report. And so that's by January 16th. So over that weekend of January 12th, 13th, and 14th, that weekend is kind of a prime time to get a lot done. And so I want you all to kind of be focused on some time expenditures that first weekend of at least hopefully having maybe half of your research plan and report already finished. So then the next week we're going to talk a little bit about some advanced searching. And then the following weekend, which would be like the 19th is a Friday, the 20th and the 21st, is I think at that point you really need to kind of have a complete rough draft of your research plan done by then. We'll meet on Tuesday the 23rd. At that time we'll just be doing a sort of a answering any questions that people have about the research plan and kind of going over anything. And then your research plan is due on Friday, January 26th at 6 o'clock p.m. So, that's a lot of, I know it's a lot of work, but it is spanned over a fair number of days for you to get this done, and you're only really working on one major issue. There's not multiple issues that you're doing research on. So I want you to just kind of have a sense of, in your calendar, marking out these first couple of weekends to spending, 5 to 10 hours each weekend working on a research plan, with the plan being due Friday the 26th. Last semester, when I asked you all about how much time you spent on your research plans, you all said the average number was about 20 hours. And so I would think that this research plan would probably be slightly around the average, maybe slightly north, so somewhere between 24 to 25 hours of work. So one thing that I want you all to do is I want you to continue using the Canvas class from last semester. And so that is, there will show you that there's a spring semester now, but Canvas is set up per semester. It isn't set up for year-long courses. So I'm going to keep everything within the fall semester because that's where your grades are now anyway. So let me kind of show you where that is. So in your dashboard, you'll see that there is brand new sort of legal research and writing for Crittenden and Rutledge. I'm going to kind of keep you all in what we did with the fall. So kind of keep using these as your platforms. One thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about now is your reading for this week was on chapter 7 in the book. And so this chapter 7, it's called the research process. What it basically does is it is a review of how to do a research plan. You all have done a research plan, so this is all review material for you. It is essentially putting it in kind of fancier words of what our process is. So the first kind of step that we get to is sort of, here's our, which is on page 167 of the reading, but point 1, familiarize yourself with the legal problem. Then you define the scope. You kind of create search queries. You gather the primary authorities, and then you analyze and update what you have. So the first part of familiarizing yourself with the legal problem is much like, step 1 of the research plan, which asks you to kind of know the facts, know what the legal issue is, know the procedural posture and any procedural issues of the case, and know the hierarchy of authority. And so that's sort of step 1, and that's also step 1 of what your research plan is. I want you all to, as we do this, pull out your previous research plan and kind of look at that and get a sense of that. And that will kind of help you do this a second time. Obviously, everything's easier the second time you do it. So the first part is step 1, familiarize yourself with the legal problem. And if we look here, it kind of has this choice of law, which is what jurisdiction's law applies to the program. Venue, what court is actually hearing this? So these are things that you're going to have to be thinking about as you begin your research plan for this appellate brief. Area of law. The area of law in this one is looks at the validity of a warrantless search of a residence as part of what is called a protective sweep. So the area of law basically is a criminal procedure issue. The issue statement, you'll see that the issue will be provided to you. It looks at the validity of that search. And then the hierarchy of authorities. And so we'll have to sort of recognize that we are in a Kentucky court, but we are concerned with federal law. So how do we sort of navigate that? And we'll go over that in class. Professor Hazelwood will go over in class. It'll seem intimidating at first, as all this stuff is, but within moments you all have it. So then we talk about defining the scope of the research, and it says here secondary sources can be the key at this stage of the process. Well, if you'll remember what the research plan is like, the first stage is kind of collecting all the data, little bits and pieces, and getting a picture of it. And step 2, section 2 of your research plan is using secondary sources. So, this basically is encouraging you to find secondary sources that will be useful to you. And we're going to look at that in a moment or two. And so what I want you to do is kind of be comfortable using the Amger Second, using the ALRs, using different texts and treatises to sort of help you figure this out. We'll go over all of this in class, but what I want to do now is we'll kind of keep going over this, but I'll give you some examples of this sort of in just a moment. Once we're done with the reading, I'll kind of show you some things that I think are useful. The next thing that you want to do is, after you begin learning about the issue through through the secondary sources, you'll begin to pick up on keywords or legal terms of art. When we start talking about what is, what area is covered by a protective sweep, these sorts of things about figuring out how to conduct search queries to get you to where you're looking for. If I keep looking at this, then this has gather the primary authorities. So the way that we gather primary authorities, which is like section 3 of the research plan, is using our key numbers, looking at cases within cases. That's very useful. Looking at using a citator to run an important case through a citator and see what other cases are talking about it. Those are all various ways to gather primary authorities. Once again, you can, use key numbers, searches, look for cases within cases, run your own searches in the database, and then using a citator to kind of find additional ones. It talks about these. This case does involve a constitutional provision, but which is a very large thing to sort of tackle. We'll talk in class. We'll talk a little bit about ways that you can limit down what you're looking at. Because if you look at, a constitutional provision on Westlaw or Lexis, it'll say that there are 100,000 citing cases. Well, that's too much for you to sort of navigate. So we'll talk in class about ways to sort of navigate this down so that you're only looking at Kentucky issues. Thinking about constitutional provisions and statutes, we're not going to have regulations in this problem. Looking at judicial opinions, those will be important. Analyzing and updating the primary authorities, this basically means, one, reading the damn cases. So you all should be used to doing that by now. So pulling cases, sort of scanning which ones are important, reading the ones that are really important, and then using a citator on them. Remember that all of this is research and writing is a recursive process. And so you're going to kind of start it, work on it, and then realize that you might need to go back again and start over again. And that's okay. That's just sort of how all of this goes. So those are some things to remember, is that a common problem is, when do I stop, or not finding enough relevant authorities? In this problem, you're going to have maybe too many relevant authorities. There's just tons of material about a warrantless search. So, and what accounts for a protective sweep, because every state is going to have numerous cases about this. And so you're going to be looking at both, federal cases. You're going to be looking at state cases from Kentucky. You could find cases from other jurisdictions. So, you're going to have enough. I mean, when do you stop researching is, one is you have to start writing at some point. Another point is, generally when you start seeing the same things over and over again, you kind of have a sense of when to stop. So I will now I want to show you all a moment or two of some kind of tricks in Westlaw and Lexis that might be helpful. So in your syllabus for your writing class on Friday, January 12th, you need to have read Maryland versus Bowie. And so we're already, within your syllabus, you're already given a very important case. Just sort of act as an entree into the subject. So if I kind of type in the citation for Maryland versus Bowie, I'm taken to this case. Notice it only has 2 headnotes. And using the headnotes is a wonderful way to get a sense of additional cases on this topic. But so here we are at Maryland versus Bowie, which is a major Supreme Court case on, protective sweeps and searches associated with an in-home arrest. So here we are. The one thing we can do is we can look at citing references. Notice that you have tons of cases. This is so much to even kind of comprehend, but I'm going to just click on citing references. And one of the things I'm going to do is look at secondary sources. And then within secondary sources, I want to click on ALR. And so this gives me a list of 43 ALRs that talk about, that all of them cite back to Maryland versus Bowie. Now, I will say that all 43 of these are not relevant, are not going to be that helpful. But then you can sort of start to pick through these and figure out which ones might be sort of helpful for you in understanding the sort of problem that you have. So there are a lot of different ones that you can kind of begin to look at. For example, this second one here, defense of good faith and action for damages under a 1983 claim. This is not relevant to your, it maybe has cited Maryland versus Bowie, but this has nothing to do with your sort of issue. So start looking at these titles and think of which ALR cases would be a useful ones to look at as we move forward. Additionally, if we go to other, so these are 240 other places that have cited to Maryland versus Bowie. If I start to look for the word Kentucky, well, look, here's a Kentucky practice series on criminal practice and procedure. This article cites to Maryland versus Bowie, so it might be good to check out the Kentucky practice series on search and exploration of arrest. And once you get to this item, once you get to this resource, also kind of having a sense of looking at the table of contents around it to get a better sense of what's going on. So I'm going to go back to my document, the looking at Maryland versus Bowie. And another thing to think about is, let's say that this is a key number that I am interested in. And if I look at this key number, I can change my jurisdiction to be Kentucky and include related federal. Let's see what shows up. And here are, 58 entries, all about the subject from numerous cases. Remembering in a key number that one case, see here, the Simpson versus Commonwealth, there are three times that this is mentioned inside of this one case. So sort of skipping down through here and getting a sense of what's relevant and what isn't. There's some that are not going to be helpful at all, some that will be really interesting. But that is another way of using the sort of key numbers to be useful for you. At this point, I think that that's sort of a good little start of thinking about, using a case that you have to find secondary sources, using key numbers that you have. Also, if I go back to the Maryland versus Bowie, you can look at cases. You can start to limit your cases down to, just Kentucky cases. And that starts to be a helpful way of filtering cases that might be useful for you to be looking at. All right. I feel like that's a good start on your research plan and a good start to understanding some of the tools for managing this. Using head notes, using AMJUR, using ALRs, Kentucky Practice, using key numbers. We'll go over this in class a little bit more. But I will say, once again, I'm excited to see you all again. It's been far too long, and we will get back to it this upcoming Tuesday. Tuesday the 9th. So, all right, on that note, I look forward to seeing you. I hope that you had a good break, and I'll catch up with you soon.